Okay, so for today's Lunch and Learn, we are going to be talking a little bit about sterile filtration and the bubble point test. And I thought this was, as I was prepping for and coming up with topics this year for Lunch and Learns, I thought this is a timely one um, for uh, for springtime. You might be getting some of those wines that you've made into bottle, and that might continue throughout the spring and the summer before the harvest season. And so, yeah, I wanted to go back, talk a little bit about sterile filtration and how to perform a bubble point test, which I'll be honest, when I started doing this last year, I was very nervous about the bubble point, and then I did it once, and I thought, what was I so nervous about? That was actually pretty straightforward. So I think there's some, I don't know, mystery or um, excitement, let's say, around the bubble point test, and its complexity, but I actually think it's quite straightforward. All right, let's jump into filtration. I'm gonna be um, focusing mostly on
All right,
membrane
good. That's
filtration.
that's better than I thought with the rain coming on, so
Oh,
I'm glad.
let's put everybody on mute. Okay, sorry about that. Um, okay, so filtration. What are we doing when we do filtration? We're clarifying our wines, we're stabilizing our wines through clarification. So we're removing things that are insoluble. Okay, if things are soluble in the wines, they're not going to come out they're not going to be removed with filtration. These are insoluble particles. So they could be microbial, they could be crystalline or amorphous materials, and they could be fibrous materials like pectin or cellulose or something that maybe was kicking around from the grape material. Now, some of you may say, oh, but I hear there's lots of wineries out there that don't filter. That is entirely possible. There's lots of wineries and lots of or let's say high-end wineries that don't want to filter their wine because they believe that they're stripping out some characteristics, some aromas, some flavors, things like that. Um, and that's their choice. I do think they need to make sure that they have a stable product when they're putting it into bottle. I think we all need to make sure of that. So they may need to be on top of their SO2 use or make sure that they're racking. They might want to be checking their turbidity to make sure that they are getting a good settling with whatever racking or maybe fining that they're doing or racking. But we filter here at the Iowa State Winery. I don't filter my research wines, but I do filter all of our commercial wines. So when it goes into bottle, and we do a series of filtration, and the last step is the sterile filtration. So that's kind of what I want to focus on today. So sterile filtration is the meaning of that. What I mean by that is we want to make sure we remove all microorganisms from the wine. We want to sterilize that wine. So it goes into the bottle and we do not have to worry about any microbial re-fermentation, let's say, especially if there's any sugar left over, or microbial spoilage. You're hoping to remove anything that might inadvertently change your wine. So in the industry, we typically say that 0.45 micron pore size is sterile filtration. In reality, you need to realize that yeast are definitely going to be removed at that 0.45 micron pore size. And many bacteria will also be removed. But if you really truly want to ensure that bacteria is removed as well, you'll want to make sure that you're using a 0.2 micron pore size. Now, the issue, of using a 0.2 micron pore size is that filtration can be slow, back pressures can be high, and so it may take a longer time to push your wine through those filters. So, and bacteria there's not very there's not very many bacteria that are living at wine pH and ethanol concentrations. And also we've got that SO2, we've got SO2 in there to hopefully control those bacteria. So just be aware. But when we say sterile filtration and we're talking about commercial winery, typically what you're using is a 0.45 micron pore size. And that's what I use for my commercial wines. Okay, so what a big discussion within filtration is absolute versus a nominal filter, an absolute filter or a nominal filter. An absolute filter is where during the manufacturing process of that filter material, the pore size is controlled. So there's geometrically regular and controlled pore size. So that's on the right side here. Let me get my laser pointer going. And on the right where it says membrane filtration, you have one pore size. Everything that is smaller than that can go through. Everything that's larger than that is going to get stuck on the surface. Okay. So examples of this: membrane filtration or cross-flow filtration. Nominal pores or nominal filtration, Nominal filtration is where we have a range of pore size within the material. So during the manufacturing, there's not necessarily a control. They're more, some of them are more natural materials, let's say. Some are not, but it's not as a controlled process. So depth filtration is the major classification, I guess, of nominal pore sizes or nominal filtration. And what you have, your filter media consists of, and I love this kind of sentence, filter media consists of numerous tortuous channels of all diameters and configurations. So as you can see in the picture here, big particles can enter the material, the filtration material, but they get stuck along the way. And so you're collecting these different materials along the way, and what comes out at the end is your filtered material, is the smallest stuff. So particles are trapped within the media. And so what this means is you can push more material through rather than the membrane filtration, which will get fouled or plugged right at the surface. So this will clog much faster, a membrane filter, and a depth filter will clog much slower because you have many different channels as material can get stuck throughout the material, throughout the filtration material. So particles are trapped within the media. So a couple of examples of this would be pad filtration or plate and frame, lenticular, or diatomaceous earth, which I don't think is as common anymore, but those are some examples of nominal filtration. So absolute filtration, when we're talking about sterile filtration, you want to be using an absolute filter because you are guaranteed that your pore size is the pore size that the manufacturer says, and that you will be removing any material that is larger than that. Whereas nominal, you are most likely removing all of the material. And there's a percentage out there. I think it's, 98 or 99% of the material removed is larger than that pore size. But there is a chance that some material could get through. So just keep that in mind. When you're doing sterile filtration, you want absolute. So let's just talk a little bit more, and I just wanted to show you some pictures. I do want to get into sterile filtration, but depth filtration, so this nominal filtration, I think one of the most commonly used, at least in the Midwest, is going to be your pad filters, your plate and frame filters. Different sizes for this depending on how much volume you're going to be filtering. This right here is a 40 by 40. And this on the right-hand side is a smaller unit. I think it's not exactly a definite size. It's a manufacturer, like you buy the pads that already come for this. It's called a Buon Vino. There are 20 by 20 um, systems as well that you can get if you want a smaller size. The nice thing with these pad filtration or plate and frame is that you can set up, and you can see it in this picture, you can set up 2 different filtration pore sizes in one pass. So you could have, let's say, when I'm doing this, I have a KS 700, which is, oh, I've got my little cheat sheet down here, which is about a 5 to 7 micron pore size. And then on the other side of the stainless steel plate, I have a KS200 or a K200, sorry, which is a 2 micron. So I can go from, I can have multiple pore sizes and multiple filtrations going on at the same time. So we find that very convenient with these plate and frame filters. The one thing I do want to say is make sure that your setup is correct. You can go through an entire plate and frame filtration and not be filtering anything if you have not set it up correctly. So there's some really great videos out there. I watch them, religiously, but the day before I go to filter, I make sure that I watch it as I'm setting it up to make sure that I am doing my filtration properly. And I'll be honest, I actually, this past year, I screwed up one day, made a mistake, and didn't filter properly. And so the next time around, I checked it on my turbidity meter to make sure what was coming out was a lot less turbid than what was going in. Now, you don't have that necessarily, that option at your wineries. Most of you, I'm assuming, don't have turbidity meters. So please make sure that you watch some videos, make sure you're setting up your plate and frame filter correctly. Moving on, a lenticular filter is really, the benefit of it is that you really don't get much leakage or loss due to leakage like you do with a plate and frame. So that is beneficial. And the pads are kind of already set up in this housing, and you just buy it. You buy the filter looking like this. The issue with this is that you can't do a 2-stage filtration in one pass. You would have to do one pass with one pore size and then another pass. So depending on, now, the other thing is you're only going to probably buy one of these filter housings. They're fairly expensive. So you do want to make sure what's the best option for how I want to work. Do I want to continue, and factor in the costs of the filter pads and the lenticular filters as well. Okay, so moving on now to the surface filtration or the absolute filtration. So membrane filter, cartridge filter. This is what we use to go into our bottling line. Before you use these kinds of filters, you do want to make sure your wine is very clear. And you've racked, or you've settled and racked or fined or done a pre-filtration before using a membrane filter. So usually this is your final filtration step. You can purchase pre-filters, which are more like a depth filter, and they have multiple layers in them, and they get tighter and tighter as the layers as you go, and so you can use those. And then the final membranes filters, and that's what they're called when you go to purchase one, they have one layer and typically very small pore sizes, 0.65, 0.45, maybe 0.2 you can purchase as well. And those are made of polyether sulfone. Now, the interesting thing with the membrane filter is you can do a 2-stage filtration. You can have 2 filter housings and go from one filter into the next. So you still can do that 2-stage filtration. The other type of absolute filtration is crossflow, and this is becoming more and more popular. It is an investment, and it would probably be for more wineries that are probably a bit larger. There are some smaller systems I've seen out there, but it is a bit of an investment. But you can. The benefit with crossflow is that you have much less fouling or plugging up of that filter media because you're running the wine tangentially you're not going straight head on into the filter. You're running the wine past the filter, and so you're kind of clearing away some of that material that's getting stuck on the filter. So I do have a video of, I don't really want to go into too much detail of crossflow, but because it is a sterile type of filtration, I did want to show a video, and then we'll talk a little bit more about cartridge filtration or membrane filtration, and we produced our own video for bubble point test. So let's watch a little video on crossflow. Okay, I've got to, actually, I think I can just do that. So the filter housing is on the right hand side. And there will be a close-up of how it works in just a second. So wine runs through the filter there, and particles get stuck against the sides of that filter, and wine will filter through, clear wine will filter through, and those particles kind of get those particles get, oh, I don't want to, I'm going to move on. Those particles get flushed out by continuous flow of that, of the wine. The wine, circles back around and continuously flows. You can do some back flushing as well if the filter does get fouled or isn't running very well. So again, that's based on pressures and things like that. So that's, very basic how a crossflow filter works. That might be an upcoming lunch and learn, because I think crossflow filtration is very interesting to a lot of people. So I want to talk a little bit more about membrane cartridge filter, because I do think that's what a lot of people are using. A couple things that I do want to talk about. So make sure you're choosing the correct storage solution for your storage time frame. So a lot of people want to reuse these filters. If you're doing plate and frame filtration, you're not going to keep those filters. They're one-time use, you throw them out. A cartridge filter, you can keep. And so there is manufacturers' recommendations on what your storage solution should be based on how long before you use it again. So sometimes you might want to store it in a sulfur citric solution, or maybe ethanol, or whatnot. So be sure to know what how long it is going to be before you are going to use it again. You fully submerge it during storage. So mine always floats, and maybe I just am not doing it quite correctly. So I take something and I try and weight it down so that it is fully submerged. You want that membrane material to be fully submerged. When you go out and use these filters, and if it's the first time or whether it's, after storage, be sure to rinse with water, room temperature, dechlorinated water. Sanitize the filter. So rinse through with hot water is, I think, the normal recommendation, but it could be a chemical sanitizer if you can't use hot water. And then rinse with water again before you start using your filter. And this will show a little bit on our video as well about that final rinse of water before you do a bubble point test. It needs to be water that is in the filter housing. The other thing, be sure to purchase the correct filter for your housing. There are different codes, and those are based on the seating and the O-rings that that are on the ends of the filter cartridge. And so there's a couple different codes. So make sure you know what housing you've purchased and what code of filter you need. And also, I guess, what height. So I usually just buy small little 10-inch filters, or maybe they're 10 centimeter. Anyway, and that's based on the fact that I'm only going to filter through maximum 300 gallons. I don't make more than 300 gallons a year at the Iowa State University Winery. If you're going to be pushing a lot more volume through these filters, you'll need, there's 20-inch, and then I believe the housing that we have will also hold a 30-inch. So you can use a 30-inch housing with a 10-inch filter in there. You don't need a small little housing. And when operating, make sure you're watching the differential pressure and make sure it doesn't exceed the manufacturer's recommendation. So the other thing I wanted to point out is you will get, when you buy a filter, you will get a piece of paper, which is kind of like your, oh, what are those called? It's instructions, but it's also your integrity testing parameters, your C of A. That's what certificate of analysis. It's kind of like that. It's not, it's not a certificate of analysis, but it gives you information on that filter. So for example, the filter that I use is a 0.45 micron, and the bubble point test, it tells me here, bubble point should be above or equal to 24 PSI. So that's where the 24 comes in the video that I'm going to show you. And it does also show you some other parameters, and some instructions are also on this sheet. I didn't copy and paste that over, but there's some instructions for storage or setup and things like that. So do really understand the your particular filter that you're buying, because I know from other companies this number is going to be different. Okay, your bubble point number, also your max flow or your diffusion pressure. So understand, take the time when you receive yours to understand and keep this. Okay, keep your the document that comes with your filter in the box. Okay, so I think next up we've got the bubble point test video that we created. So we're going to watch that, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion after that. So let's watch this. It's 5 minutes long, and we'll put just the video up on YouTube as soon as this lunch. Hi everyone, my name's Erin Norton. I'm the director of the Midwest Grape and Wine Industry Institute. We're here today in the Iowa State University Winery, and what we're going to show you today is how to do a bubble point test. Now we use a membrane filter as we filter into our bottling line. So that's how this is set up to go from tank into the bottling line. This, what's inside of this housing right now is a sterile filter, so the pore size is at 0.45 micron. And we do a bubble point test here at Iowa State before and after our bottling sessions or our filtering sessions, because we want to make sure that the filter was had good integrity the entire time. So we're going to show you how to get set up for a bubble point. Here's a graphic to orient yourself with the setup. We have the filter housing, the inlet, and the outlet. We will fill the housing with water and push water through the filter, inlet to outlet, for a little while. It's important that water is the final rinse and not a cleaning solution through your filter before a bubble point test. We're going to drain that water as best as possible before the test. For a bubble point test, we're going to connect a gas cylinder to the inlet. It's important to note that this gas must be nitrogen or compressed air. Do not use CO2 for a bubble point test. We're going to push this gas through the filter and observing both a tube attached to the outlet and the inlet gauge that will show an increase in pressure as pressure is increased from the gas cylinder. This shows us attaching the connections at the inlet for the gas cylinder. We use a quick connect connection, which we find very convenient. At the outlet, we are attaching a similar looking connection, but it has a piece of tubing so that we can place this in a container of water and we can observe any bubbles coming out during the test. Important to note that you'll need to close up any drain valves before beginning the test, and be sure your inlet valve to the gas cylinder and outlet valve to the tubing are both open. You'll begin the bubble point test by opening your gas cylinder and slowly increasing your gas flow. You may see some water flow out of the outlet tube or some random bubbles. This water is just residual water that was in the filter and the filter housing. So when does bubble point occur? You'll slowly increase the gas flow and watch the inlet gauge. You should pass the manufacturer's specified bubble point before seeing a steady stream of bubbles. There should be no activity on the outlet gauge. If you do not see any bubbles after 5 to 8 psi above the specified bubble point, you do not need to increase the gas any further. This indicates that your filter is sound and you do not want to push your filter too far above bubble point because you risk blowing your filter with high gas pressure. At this point, you can turn off and disconnect your gas cylinder and carefully release the pressure in your filter housing. Be sure to be careful as this is under high pressure. Your filter is now ready to go and you can connect your wine and filter or store your filter for future uses. In the case of a bubble point test failure, please remember that the bubble point test only identifies the gross integrity of the system and does not pinpoint where a problem could have occurred. In the case of a failure, be sure to inspect the entire system, including all of your valves, your gasket seatings, and your O-rings. Re-wet your filter media and reperform a bubble point test. Reasons for a potential bubble point test failure include insufficient wetting of the membrane, incorrect seating of the membrane within the housing, damaged O-rings, or valves that are not properly closed or gaskets that are not seated properly. And lastly, you could have loss of your filter integrity, and in which case you will need to replace that filter. Okay. That is what we've got for today. For I guess let me think if there's any other things I want to follow up on. I do want to say if you are making sweet wines, you really do want to consider filtration. You want to remove as many of those microorganisms as possible to make sure that there's no re-fermentation in the bottle. So if you're a winery that says that you don't want to do filtration, just consider, ask yourself why. The other thing I would say is that the varieties we're growing here in the Midwest, we've got a lot of aroma, a lot of flavor in these varieties. And I have yet to see a wine that gets stripped of flavor because of filtration. Maybe it happens. Maybe there's some delicate varieties we're growing, but I think our varieties are pretty jam-packed with a lot of flavor. So I'm not sure I would worry too much about losing aromas and flavors due to filtration. Okay, like always, please reach out to us with any questions or suggestions or things like that. We can help walk you through anything to do with filtration. And then just a plug for some of our upcoming events. May 6th for our Lunch and Learn, we will have Randall Voss back here talking about the original plan was mechanization in the vineyard. I assume he'll still talk about that, but maybe he'll give us a little update on how he thinks the spring has gone as well, because we've had a little bit of a weird spring. And then June, we'll talk about thiols and esters in wine. So those are some of the important flavor components that we have, and how do we promote them? How do we keep them, and things like that. June 6th, I'm saying this tentatively. I haven't even shared this date with my staff yet, but I'm was looking at the calendar, and I think that's when I will be holding our intensive tasting proficiency training. So that's our sensory training that we hold every year. And the other, June 18th, Randall and I are hoping to be at Fireside Winery for a joint viticulture and enology meetup. We're going to have some data from our Frontenac Blanc study and maybe some other things to share with you. So so stay tuned for that. Pencil those in on your calendar to maybe hold the dates. Okay, on that, I'm going to stop sharing.